Questions, comments, and considerations of such and so that you want to know about? Anything that you want to know about that you don't know about already? Comments, questions, anybody? Nobody? Okay. All right, passage for the day then is Psalm 90. We're going to look especially at verses 10 to 12. Famous psalm, very famous psalm. Probably second or third most famous psalm in the whole book. Psalm 90, verses 10 to 12. 90, 90. Psalm 90 is famous for two things. First of all, being written by Moses. Few psalms are written by Moses. Kind of always been somewhat of a perplexion among scholars as to why, even though it was written by Moses and probably well known long before David's time, why it winds up in the middle of the book of Psalms rather than towards the beginning. Who knows? The organization in the book of Psalms is rather, how should we say, eclectic. It's rather odd. There doesn't seem to be a whole lot of rhyme and reason to it. So, any case, written by Moses, so that makes it famous. The other thing that makes it kind of famous is that it's a psalm that is used quite often and has been for the entire history of Christianity for funerals. You see the subscription or the title that the NASB has given and talks about man's transitoriness. That's kind of a weird word, transitoriness. Transitory means what? What does transitory mean? Transitory. Non-permanent. Okay, good. Non-permanent. Any other thoughts? What's that? A passage. Okay, transit. Okay, good. All right. The idea is that what Moses seems to be doing in this psalm is compare and contrast two things. The eternity of God, God's viewpoint of time, which is eternal. We often like to say there is no time with God. And while that's true as far as God is concerned, it's not really true as far as He works in our world. He works with time. He is not affected by time. And He can see the past and the future as present at all times. So it's almost as though the past, let's say the creation even, and the last day or beginning of eternity in our lives is running at the same time to God, in His view, occurring simultaneously. That's, of course, very hard for us to contemplate. We can't figure that out. To us, time is linear. Okay, time. We have A, B, C, 1, 2, 3. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, blah blah blah. Okay, so to us, everything that we do revolves a little bit around our conception and our dealing with time. We have times for church service. We have appointments we have to make. We celebrate birthdays. We have holidays. I mean, time is really kind of the way we exist. Go to bed at a certain time. We get up a certain time. We have schedules and so on and so forth. Okay. That does not apply to God, but God still uses time and He works in time. So, for example, He can have a plan of salvation in eternity, all worked out in His mind, in His will, all worked out, and knows who will be in heaven in eternity, even. So, from beginning to end, He's got it all worked out, He's got it all laid out, He sees it all, and yet He orchestrates the passage of time and the events in time in such a way as to bring those things about. So He knows, let's say, for example, He has, in His plan of salvation, decided that some 4,000 years or so after creation will come the coming of Christ. That he determined that His Son would take human form around 4,000 years after the fall. Let's not say creation. Let's say the fall. And so then, all the things that He does, the way that He works, in our view, in the Bible's view, is that He has these things occur. He has, of course, the flood occurs. Abraham, He has Abraham moving to Palestine. Then, Isaac and Jacob come along, and Jacob's sons, and so on and so forth, and they live in Egypt, and they leave Egypt, they go to the Promised Land, and then they go through various machinations in the Promised Land. They go off to Babylon in captivity, they come back from that. Then other things happen during that silent period between Malachi and John the Baptist, and then things work out so that, as we saw in another passage that we looked at before, when Paul's talking in Galatians, he says, in the fullness of time. So when all of the things occurred that God wanted to occur before His Son would take on human flesh, He caused those things to happen in time. So to say that with God there is no time is a bit of a misstatement in a way. So I use that term, and we can talk that way, but let's not always remember or understand that God's working with us. And when He's working with us, He works with us in time. So with God there is no time is true as far as He looks at things, but He still works in time, and things have to happen. Things have to actually occur. Okay? It doesn't do any good to have a plan of salvation if it's not carried out. The plan of salvation actually have to carry. Jesus actually has to be born. He has to live. He has to suffer. He has to die. He has to rise from the dead. Those things have to happen in time, in a chronological order. Otherwise, the plan of salvation does not come about. You cannot just have the plan of salvation in God's head, so to speak, and that's it. No, He actually causes it to happen. So what Moses does is Moses takes that idea and the eternity of God, and he contrasts it with the transitory nature of man's life. And basically what he's saying, he's not saying that man is not eternal, because he is in one direction. Man has a starting point. Every human has a starting point. Call it conception. And from that starting point, we do not have an end. We use terms like destroyed in hell. But in a true sense, that's not a theologically correct statement, because nothing is annihilated in hell. There is real fire in hell. There are real people in hell. Well, right now there are real souls in hell. And there will be real people in hell in eternity. And so what Moses is doing is talking about basically this span of our eternity that we live here on this earth in imperfection, in the grasp of sin, if you will, and dealing with various issues and problems and so on and so forth. And he compares that to the way God looks at things. And the way God looks at things and the way God is in his attributes is without beginning and without end, and therefore has a much better or a much more perfect, let's put it that way, view of time and events. So that's what he's doing. That's what Moses is doing. Now, what caused Moses to do this? We don't know. When Moses wrote this, we don't know. Did Moses write this on the mountain, when he was receiving the book of Genesis and the history of the Jews, early Jews from God? I don't know. Did he write it right before he died? I don't know. We don't know. We have no idea. All we know is that from the very beginning, long before there was put together a Bible, the Jews recognized this psalm as written by Moses and had a special kind of place for it. And when it was incorporated into the book of Psalms, they chose this place for it. And again, why number 90? I don't know. So, let's look at a couple verses. And I like these verses in particular because they talk about God's anger and fear and how we are to respond to that. So, verses 10 to 12. As for the days of our life, they contain 70 years, or if due to strength, 80 years. Yet their pride is but labor and sorrow, for soon it is gone, that is, life is gone, that is, earthly life is gone, and we fly away. We leave the planet. Who understands the power of your anger, speaking of God, and your fury according to the fear or respect or obeisance, whatever you want to say there, that is due to you? So, or therefore, teach us to number our days, that we may present to you a heart of wisdom. Okay. So Moses seems to put a limit on human life. If you remember back to the time of the flood, there's a statement there, God's talking to Noah, and he says man's life will be 120 years. Now, what does that mean? Well, if you go with the context, what God is saying is there are 120 years between the time that God announces the flood and the flood happens. Some scholars, early Christian fathers and others, took this and kind of ran with it, and they said, God put a limit on the age of man after the flood of 120 years. That's kind of hard to prove. That's not what God is talking about in the first place, in that spot. Second place, we know that Noah and his sons lived into their 500s. We know Abraham lived longer than that, longer than 120 years. Granted, certainly after Abraham, the longitude or the longevity of age goes down quite precipitously till you get the time of Christ, and you're lucky to see 40, basically. Middle Ages, a 50-year-old was considered old. If you managed to make it till 60 in the time of the Reformation, you were considered quite old. And it kind of stayed there for a couple hundred years until we get into the 20th century. After the 20th century, then it began to go up quite a bit, especially in what we call the Western countries. So now, I don't remember what it is now. I think it's 80-something, yes?
79.6, because there's something on YouTube. The expected age of all different countries.
Yeah.
And ours is 79.6. It dropped from 82.
82.
10 years ago.
Yeah, okay. So 82, and I think it's a year or two different from males to females. I think women live a couple years more, I think.
Well, I think they took it.
yeah, they're going to have that. But I think in general that's what it's. So let's say 80 years. Well, that's pretty much what Moses is saying, and Moses lived 1,500 years before Christ. So 3,500 years ago, Moses is saying 70 or 80 years, and seems to be pretty much the average nowadays. Of course, we hear people every once in a while, we hear of somebody who's 114 or 115, 116, something like that. But that's pretty rare. It's pretty unusual. It seems like, I think I read someplace that those of 100 and over, seeing like 100, 105, 110, are a fast-growing population of people. And that kind of makes sense. You could kind of see that with various advances in medicine and so on and so forth. But, it's very hard to get beyond that. It's very hard to get beyond 70, 80, 90. It's very hard to get beyond that for whatever reason. My wife and I were talking about this the other day regarding Betty White. We had just seen her, I don't know, a month ago, 2-3 months ago, whatever. She looked pretty good on TV. And so when she went downhill, boy, she went downhill fast. Boom! And that was it. She was gone. And so, it seems like a lot of these older people do real well, for a long, long time. But when they kind of hit a wall, they're not around much longer. So Moses here is he's not putting a limit. He's not. This is not a command. This is not a law from God. Okay, it's an observation. And in Moses' day, it probably was a minority, a very, very small minority who made it that long. But still, as he said, by strength, if we manage to make longer than that. Know what he says then, pride and labor and sorrow, soon is gone. Now, we don't very often think of 50 years or 60 years or 70 years or 75 years as soon. We look back on World War II and we say, man, that was a long time ago. We look back on the war between the states or the Revolutionary War and we say, well, that was a long time ago. Okay, but that's not the way God looks at it. God looks at things like that and he says, wow, that's right away. That's real soon. Okay, so 70, 80 years to God is real soon. And that's what God is telling us. God is telling us here, again, observation, not a law, not a command, but an observation that is relatively short when you're looking from an eternal standpoint. All right? So this is soon, and notice it's pride, and I kind of always get a kick out of this. Pride, labor, and sorrow. Pride in what? Always ask that question. Pride in what? When we talk about human existence, pride in what? What do you suppose Moses is referring to there?
Your own existence, your own self.
Yeah, exactly. Look at me, I'm here. Oh boy. Yeah. As though what? What else? What else? Yeah. Our time is pride, full of pride, because it's almost like, well, we caused ourselves to be here. No, we didn't. We didn't cause ourselves to be here. You could go into all kinds of. I did this once, I think, in another class here, not that long ago. We talked about reproduction and we talked about the odds. What are the odds of conception? What are the odds of fertilization? And they're really pretty astronomical. They're really pretty astronomical. I mean, the population nut cases, the crazy people who are mind-boggling over their population, they would have us believe that, oh my goodness, we got people, coming out of our ears. I mean, there's, tons of. Science tells us different. Science tells us that the the possibilities or probabilities of creating a new human life are pretty rare, are pretty high. This is why I think in the church, it has always been seen as somewhat of a congratulatory move, and it still is today. I think people still say, when somebody's expecting, when a couple is expecting a child, we still say congratulations. Why? You ever wonder that? You ever wonder that? Why? Who started that? Well, it started before time, I think. I think it started, immediately. Because I think innately we know that this is a 1 in a billion shot. This is or 1 in a 10,000 shot or 1 in a 100,000 shot. The fact that we are here is no pride of ourselves. The fact that we are here is, if we weren't Christians or weren't biblical people, we would say, man, that's just a lucky shot. It's just a lucky chance. Okay. Now, of course, we know there's no such thing as chance. We know there's no such thing as luck. But when you really break it down and you look at the many things that are in the way, the many barriers that have to be overcome, human life is really very, 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 very unique and very, very special and very precious. Good grief. I mean, look at the oceans. Fish produce billions, right? Sea creatures, billions. I mean, some land animals produce dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens all the time. Now, of course, we know that a very small percentage of those manage to make it to adulthood. But that's not the point. The rest of nature overproduces because the children born or the spawn or whatever you want to call them get eaten up pretty quick. Whether you're talking flowers, whether you're talking animals, whether you're talking fish, whatever you're talking, the vast majority of them don't amount to much. Okay, they get conceived, if you will, but they don't amount to much. With humans, it's the opposite. Now, it's true that there have been times in human history where infant mortality was pretty high. But even when infant mortality was a lot higher than it is today, it was never 100%. It was never even 90%. I think the best you could say is that various times in human history, it might have been maybe 50%, maybe. But even that's stretching it a little bit. So we really have no reason to be prideful. And then the NASB here puts another word here, but it's not in the original Hebrew. But the grammar tells us that this is the thinking, this is the idea. So you have pride on one side, hey, look what we did. And on the other side, what is it? Labor and sorrow. You work, as God said to Adam, you work by the sweat of your brow. In paradise, again, we don't know how long Adam and Eve lived in paradise, but in paradise, the assumption is that food was produced without a whole lot of effort. And whatever effort there was very pleasant effort, was very good effort, was effort that Adam enjoyed. Let's say, just for sake of argument, that perfection lasted a year, just for arguing. Okay, for that year, Adam greatly enjoyed working in the garden. That was not work, it was not labor, it was not by the sweat of his brow. And the food that was produced without a whole lot of trouble. Without any trouble at all, I suppose we really should say. So that it was very pleasurable, it was very enjoyable, it was very easy, let's say, okay? So what Moses is saying is, okay, first of all, you have a lot of pride in your existence, and you really shouldn't. Second of all, when you look at your existence, what is it? It's a lot of work. It's a lot of work, and that a lot of times that work is not all that pleasant, it's not all that enjoyable, it's not all that great. It's difficult. Even if it's a job that you like, what they say, you do something you like, you never have to work a day in your life. Well, I'm sorry, that's not true. I'm here to tell you that's not true. I love my job, and it's still work. It's still work. There are times when the last thing I want to do is have to look up some Hebrew or Greek that I don't recognize in the text. And, oh, man, why do I have to do that? I can't remember what that stupid word is, so I have to look it up. Of course, if I had better memory, or maybe studied more, I wouldn't have to do that. But still, that's not the point. The point is, it's still a pain, and it does make things difficult. So, labor and sorrow. Okay, moving on. Days of our life, 70 years, 80 years, turn of sorrow, soon we fly away. Who understands the power of your anger, your fury, according to the fear that has drew you? Rhetorical question, of course. Rhetorical question, meaning no one. No one understands the power of your anger. Now, this is an interesting point, and we'll come back to this in a way when we look at the ELCA in a few minutes. One of the things that seems to bother modern theologians, including those who call themselves Christians, is this whole concept of the wrath of God. They don't like it. They don't like the concept of God being angry. They don't like that. Now, that is part and parcel, as we have seen, if you go back to the very beginning of this class, this Sunday Bible class, you go all the way back to the Hinduism and animism and all the first isms that we looked at. You remember that all of these groups all had a concept of angry gods. Whether they had a lot of gods, as the Hindus do, thousands, hundreds of thousands really, or the Egyptians, or the Romans, or the Greeks, or the Chinese, or whoever you're talking about. Everybody has a concept of an angry God. Everybody. You go to the Pacific Islands, you've never seen a white guy, but the religion that Captain Cook, let's say, found when he got to those islands wasn't a religion where our God is angry at us because we're not perfect in whatever way, and we then must appease him or her or it, okay? And we either, throw a virgin into a volcano or something, right? Cut ourselves like the prophets of Baal and bleed all over the place. Whatever we do. This is part and parcel of the human psyche. The Supreme Being is angry with us, and we have to fix it. The problem with that is you can't fix it, of course. And if you look at all these religions, none of them really fix the problem. All they do is put a Band-Aid on it. And it doesn't really get fixed, as we looked when we saw, we studied purgatory, and we studied purgatory in all the different religions. We saw that it doesn't get fixed until after you're dead. And even then, it takes a long time. Roman purgatory is not the only one that takes us long periods of time. The purgatory of other religions, as we saw, it can be darn near eternal. So that's an idea. The modern scholars, say from the last 250 years, hate that. They hate that idea. That to them, that's uncivilized. That's the whole concept of uncivilized. That you've got this angry, wrathful, vengeful God who's out for blood. Who's out for blood, by George. Okay? They don't like that. They say that's very uncivilized. So this is what's so funny. Okay? Man doesn't change. Even the scientists will say that. Man doesn't change. We have not become better. And all you have to do is just look around the world and see that. The other day, yesterday as a matter of fact, the San Diego paper had the story about two transients, okay, who were kind of best buds. Hung around together, they'd, panhandle together, got a little bit of money together, would get on the trolley and go around town and find other places to panhandle and stuff. They were kind of they were thick as thieves, right? So yesterday morning, early in the morning, the two of them get off a trolley, and they're at the main train station downtown San Diego, and they're walking on the platform. The tracks are over here. Trolley led them off. The train tracks are over here. Now this is Amtrak, and when it's not Amtrak, it's freight trains, and freight trains are running back and forth from San Diego to LA, and pretty good sized things, and fairly moving along at a pretty good clip, even downtown. And so these two guys, according to witnesses, they get off the trolley and they're joking around, laughing and whatever, blah, 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 blah. And they get to arguing. And they get, oh yeah, really? Yeah. And as the freight train is coming, one guy just shoves the other guy in front of the train. No time to react, no time to, he's squished dead. He's dead. He's dead instantly. Okay? That's human beings. Okay? Something like that, you would say, okay, that could have happened 100 years ago, 1,000 years ago, 10,000 years ago, right? We're no better now than we were back then. But the crazy scientists would say, well, we're more civilized. And so therefore our religion needs to be more civilized. And so it's uncivilized of us to have a religion where God needs blood, or God needs payback, or God is angry and vengeful and wrathful. It would be much better if we had a God who was nice all the time. A God with a long, with get along and go along attitude. You know, a God who says, here's my will, this is the way I want you to live, but if you don't, it's okay too. See? That's what they want, right? Now, of course, what powers, if any, do humans have on the nature of God in the first place? None, right? Zero, nada. So that's the crazy thing about the scholars and whatever today. They have no way to remake God. They have no way to tell God how he has to behave. That's ridiculous, right? God is God. God behaves however God, the very definition of God means that he is something greater than nothing else exists. And if that's the case, he can do whatever he darn well pleases. And if he wants to be capricious, and if he wants to be fickle, he can be fickle and capricious. Now, the Bible tells us our God is not fickle and capricious. But if he wants to be that way, he can be that way, and we got nothing to say about it. So, you know, it's fascinating to me. It's fascinating to me these people remake God. But anyway, this is what they don't like. They hate for God to be the way he is. They don't like it at all. They don't like it because this is not what they signed on for, so to speak. Okay? And they're thinking, well, if we're more civilized, okay, then we won't have this problem, you see. Okay? Right. So that's why they say what they do. Okay? That's why Moses puts it the way he does. Who understands the power of your anger? Nobody. Okay? Your fury, the fear, the respect, the obedience that is due to you. Okay? You are due those things. Those things are supposed to be for God. All right? Nobody understands that. And so then he finishes off here, teach us to number our days and present you a heart of wisdom. So, teach us to number our days basically means what?
Teach us to understand that we have a short life.
Yeah, teach us to count every day as though it is our last. Right. Okay, that's a pretty simple concept. I think we can understand that. And present us a heart of wisdom. Well, what's wisdom?
In his plan.
Yeah, knowledge. Yeah, knowledge of what God desires and how to accomplish that. Okay, which is, of course, by grace through faith. So presenting God a heart of wisdom basically simply means to believe what he says and not reject him. Okay, so that's again, that's kind of a encapsulation, if you will, of our entire existence. Yes, sir.
My issue
sometimes he doesn't bring us to the grace of him until we're already. Like my 20s, I totally wasted doing things that I knew were wrong, but I still did them in the 30s, and then in my late 30s is when I realized this ain't right.
Yeah. Well, I agree. I think we all can, in one way or another, say the same thing. That just shows God's patience. Because at a point where we are constantly disobeying him or constantly flaunting him, whatever, rejecting him, he could just bring us to an end, and then we go to hell, right? So he allows us to continue living so that we come to his grace. I think that's the first thing. The second thing is that if we look at it, his grace is with us early on, in not every case, but a lot of cases. I'm thinking of people who are baptized. Now, I wasn't an infant. I was 4 years old, old enough to kind of remember a little bit of it. But I'm thinking of those who come to God's grace at the very beginning of their lives, and then would say, as you would say, at later point, 40, 50, whatever, hey, now I finally realize what God wants for me, da, da, da. It's not as though God's grace wasn't there. It's not as though God didn't bring grace to that person early on from the very beginning. It's just that it was not recognized, or it was, in a way, lost. This is why I think it's important for Christian theology to continue to teach. It is possible to fall away. Now, of course, that begs the question, isn't it true that those whose names are written in the book of life will all make it to heaven regardless? Yes, it is. Isn't it true that those whose names are not written in the book of life will not make it? That's true too. So that's true. However, the Bible also teaches that it's possible to fall away. Now, I grant you that's contradictory. That's probably a lot more contradictory than some doctrines that we talk about. It's pretty contradictory to say, Jesus said, not one of you that's in my hand will fall out. Not one. Not one of you the Father has given me will fall away. And yet, Peter writes, be careful lest you fall away. Now, I'd be happy to say to anyone, that's about as contradictory as you can get. I don't know that you can get more opposite than those two things, but they're both taught by Scripture. And the reason I think they're both taught by Scripture, is just this exact point, that people can recognize that they have fallen away and come back. And that God brings that about in their life at various ways and means and times in order to bring them to that completion in heaven. That's the only way I can explain it. I can't explain it any other way. So we'll leave it at that. All right, let's quickly look at the excursus 1. $145. These are quotes, as noted there underneath the title, taken from a Dogmatics, and Dogmatics is the theology textbook. Dogmatics textbook used in all their seminaries. I believe the ELCA still has 3 seminaries. The book is written by Carl Brayton and Robert Jensen. I think one of those is still alive. It was published back in '84. It's gone through a couple of editions, but the new editions are no different in these quotes anyway. If you feel as though, or if you suspect perhaps that the quotes may have been taken out of context, or if you feel that the quotes are not fair, you're more than welcome to borrow my set of, there are 2 volumes, set of these dogmatics textbooks and look them up yourself and read the things through, cover to cover, and see if you come up with a different conclusion. All right, so I picked out a few topics that I think are important. Let's see what they have to say. The Bible. Today, it is impossible to assume the literal historicity of all things recorded. It's a fancy way of saying what? These are all, by the way, fancy ways of saying simple things.
Not completely true.
It's not true. There are mistakes, there are errors in factuality in the Bible. The Bible is not infallible. It's not, it may be inspired, they might say, but it's not inerrant and it's not infallible. Do you need this page? I'm jumping to this. I figured the last few paragraphs, international Lutheran bodies, who cares?
Oh, okay.
You found it? Okay. So that's what they believe about the Bible. Well, let's narrow it down a little bit. How about the Gospels? How about the speeches of Jesus, Sermon on the Mount, parables, so on and so forth? Here's what they say. Such passages, talking about the sermons and parables, in their present form at least, are usually regarded as having come not from Jesus himself, but from later interpretive traditions. What's an interpretive tradition, do you suppose? Well, how somebody sees it, yeah. Yeah, humans. And by that, what they're really saying, and again, you can read the entire paragraph or the entire page or section there, but what they're really saying is that the stories about Jesus were made up by people who lived long after him. That's basically what they're saying. Okay. That's interpretive traditions. Traditions, okay, so 100 years after Jesus died, people remembered him and said, I think he would have said this, or I think he would have answered that. And so they put that down, and pretty soon that became gospel. Okay? So not only is the Bible full of errors and mistakes, but the words of Jesus cannot be trusted. You cannot say, Jesus, thus saith Jesus. You can't say that. Okay? How about miracles? It should not be excluded that some of the miracles attributed to Jesus may have no historical basis and serve only to emphasize his exceptional status. I never did find out what supposedly his exceptional status was, according to these guys, except they condemn him with faint praise by saying, oh, he was a really great guy. It's some really, really intuitive and insightful things to say, if he said them at all. So, may have no historical basis means what? They didn't happen. It's not that they weren't true, they just didn't happen at all. They're made up. Okay? The deity of Christ. In the age of Christendom, the dogmas, they hate that word, by the way, dogmas. That's a very negative connotation to these people. The dogmas of Trinity and of Christ, as formulated in the Nicene and Athanasian creeds, were necessary to believe for salvation. Yeah, they were, still are. Now, the biblical critics could apply the scriptural principle of Protestantism to show that these dogmas cannot be required for faith, since they lack solid biblical support. So you can't require people to believe the Trinity and the two natures of Christ because there's no biblical support for them. In other words, they're not true. So while the Nicene and Athanasian Creed might have been real nice to have around 1,000 years ago, we don't need them anymore. Because they really don't reflect the way we think. The Trinity. This one is one of the best, really. And it's pretty early in Volume 1. Truly, the Trinity is simply the Father and the man Jesus and their Spirit as the Spirit of the believing community. Now, that's about as good a definition of the Trinity as you will ever find in the Mormon Church. That is a perfect Mormon definition of Trinity. But it's not a biblical one. These people are not Trinitarians. They do not believe three persons in one Godhead. 3 in 1, 1 in 3. They do not believe that. Therefore, by definition, they cannot be Christians. They are unbelievers. Now, I'll say that in a minute. Virgin birth. Finally, this is after a long discussion about virgin births. The history and phenomenology. Don't you love that word? That's a great word, huh? Phenomenology. Huh? Finally, the history and phenomenology of religions have called our attention to the mythic character of the incarnation. That sentence right there denies the two natures of Christ. The mythic character of the incarnation. So the incarnation, Jesus, God becoming man, is a myth. Right? It's a myth. Didn't happen. It's a legend. Fairy tale. The notion, I think the new edition should read, the mere notion of the pre-existent Son of God becoming a human being in the womb of a virgin and then returning to his heavenly abode is bound up with a mythological picture of the world that clashes with our modern scientific worldview. In other words, we're too smart to fall for that. We know better. We know that didn't happen, that it's a myth. Now, if you read the entire long section, I had a hard time picking out just one sentence or two from that section, because they do go on, and they talk all about these virgin birth legends and myths in other religions. Well, as we have found in studying other religions, there's all kinds of commonality between Christianity, the Bible, and other religions. Like I said, the wrath of God, sin, purgatory, making the atonement, all that kind of stuff, sacrifice. You can fairly ask the question, which came first, chicken or the egg? If Christianity is correct, in full-blown Christianity is the chicken. Which came first, chicken or the egg? Chicken. God created the chicken. The chicken laid the egg. So the chicken is biblical theology, if you will, Christianity, whatever you want to call it, Judaism, Old Testament Judaism. That's the chicken. Hinduism and Buddhism and Egyptian religion and all the rest of them, all the religions, are the egg. They came from that, not the other way around. Atonement, that's a good one. What is the import of this tradition? Now they are talking about the tradition of sacrifice. Again, what I was talking about before about payback and making things right, making things good. So what's the import of this tradition? What they did in Volume 2, early in Volume 2, it's all about the whole concept of plan of salvation, is they listed all of these various ways in which these religions have this high idea of payback. Put in its most crass form, this view would hold that Jesus' death is a sacrifice in which he is a substitute for us who pays the divine justice what is due for human sin and or appeases divine wrath. That's a good way to put it. That's exactly what it does. Okay? And here again, I think the new edition should say, but as we shall see, there is a long tradition, especially among conservative Western Christians, which has taken this line. No, I shouldn't put the but there. The next word should be but. But there seems to be virtual consensus among contemporary biblical scholars, of course, modern guys, modern fellows, that this tradition finds little support in the Scriptures, either in the Old or New Testament. So they looked as best they could. They tore apart the Old Testament, they tore apart the New Testament, and they did not find any atonement in there.
Where did they even...
Yeah.
I mean, you can't be much of a scholar if you miss that.
I mean, Day of Atonement, hello?
I mean...
No atonement in the Old Testament? Huh? What?
It must not be.
And again, you'd have to read the entire long section, it goes on for hundreds of pages, how they deny this and why they deny this. But it's basically, what it comes down to is what I was talking about before. What it comes down to is this whole concept, come on, it's like this God with fangs and blood dripping from it, and a big whip, and I'm going to get you, and we're too mature to believe in that anymore. We don't buy that. We don't believe in God as a boogeyman, see? God is not some boogeyman who's going to come and extract a pound of flesh, for your sins or whatever. That's the way that they see it. Because they do not like this idea, this whole sacrifice idea, this whole idea of having to appease an angry God. It's just, no. Now, who does this guy think he is? That he's mad because we are who we are. Right? I mean, some of these guys still believe in creation in a way, and they'll say, hey, God made us this way. We're this way. We like to lie and cheat and steal. We like to commit adultery. We like that stuff. We liked it. We like to murder. We liked it. So why is he mad at us? Why is he mad at us? Because, hey, we're just doing what we do. See? They don't like that. They don't like that whole concept. See? And so God, they make this God they change him from a boogeyman, they change him into this mamby-pamby, limp-wristed kind of, it's okay. I'm okay, you're okay, everybody's okay, we're all okay, everything's fine, don't worry about it. Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. That's not, that's what they're saying. Resurrection. Mythological symbolism contributed to the interpretation of the event of the resurrection. There again, mythological symbolism. In other words, the resurrection is a myth. And we're talking Christ's resurrection here. The question has become acute in modern theology, whether in the resurrection we are dealing only with a myth or with a truly historical event. Now, when they say the question has become acute, what do they mean by that? It has become real serious, and the answer is no. In other words, it's become acute, it's become very serious, and it's not what we thought. That's why it's so serious. I mean, it's become a real problem. That's what they're saying. Okay? The question has become a huge problem because the answer is not what we expect it to be. And the answer to the question is, we are indeed dealing only with a myth and not with a historical event. Now, all of that is bad enough. The last one really takes the cake. In recent years, especially under the impact of a renewed listening to the biblical documents, what do you suppose that means? Listening to the biblical documents. Yeah, reading behind the lines, not between the lines, behind the lines. Okay? In other words, ignoring what it really says and making up what you want it to say. The idea of an immortal soul has become increasingly suspect. So much so, you would say, that we don't buy it. And this is really the bottom line for modern theology. The bottom line for modern theology, you have to know this, and this is true not only in ELCA, but also in the Methodist Church, the Presbyterian Church, the United Church of Christ, the Anglican Church, the Episcopal Church, and in some cases, the more Roman Church. But across the vast majority of mainline denominations, and I'm talking here about the seminary professors mostly, the leadership, the pastors, they do not any longer believe in an eternal soul. This has been true for at least 50 years, probably longer. And so most of the pastors that you meet in these theological groups, in these denominations, do not have any concept anymore of an immortal soul, which makes their religion bogus. Because what's the point of the church then? If the church is not here to get us to heaven, because there is no heaven and there's no soul to go to heaven, then what's the point? I asked this of Professor Tejan, the president of Concordia Seminary in 1972, I think it was, one or two. I was chaplain for the Walther League group in my Missouri Synod congregation. And he came down and visited all the youth in that part of Arizona. And we all sat on the floor and listened to him. He was very entertaining, very glib, very sharp. But he was dressed pretty much like this. And so I asked a question. I said, Professor Tejan, President Tejan, he was president of the seminary. President Tejan, if human beings do not have an immortal soul, why are you in this business? It perplexed me. And this was before I had it in my head I wanted to be a pastor. I was just curious. Why would you dress up like that? Why would you teach at a seminary? Why would you become president of a seminary? Why would you stay in a religion if religion had no goal, like getting to heaven? And his answer went something like this. I can't quote him verbatim anymore, but his answer went something like this. First of all, he goes, "Oh, you're a sharp little cookie, aren't you?" Something around those lines, you know. He goes, "Oh, well, gee, you have trouble with this one, don't you?" Yeah. But he said, well, you know, that's a fair question. He did admit, he said, well, okay, it's a fair question. He said, I'm glad you asked. Really, glad you asked. He said, the way I see it is that you only go around once. Again, I don't think he used that term, but that's what he meant. We live one time. We live for a certain number of years, and that's it. We're gone. Oh, he even though he denied the immortality of the soul, he did believe in God. At least he told us he did. He believed in a God. I don't know who he was, but anyway. He said, what makes life worth living? He said, I would say peace, tranquility, brotherhood, kindness, fond memories, family, mom, dad, brothers, sisters, all of those things, having a home, working for a living, producing whatever, retiring on the beach, that's worthwhile. That all of that's worthwhile. And some of us need to be around to help that happen. So we need to teach morals and ethics. We need to teach people that it's better to be nice to somebody than not nice to somebody. We need to be around to help people with their emotional and mental problems and difficulties, with their depressions and their worries and their cares and things like that. They need somebody to talk to. And so I'm in this business to make people's lives a little bit better. And if you would like to make people's lives a little bit, if you would like to give your life to make other people's lives a little bit better, that's a good thing. That's a good thing. We applaud that. We work for that. In somewhat the same way as the soldier goes off to war, leaves behind millions and millions and millions of other people, and sacrifices maybe his life, but if not, years of his life anyway, or months anyway, for the good of those people. That's a good thing. Okay? So that's good. Okay? Now, had I been older and a little wiser, a little smarter, I would have asked the second question. If he would have called on me again, which he probably wouldn't have. But I would have asked the second question, which is, excuse me, who says that's good? And how do you know, if you say God, how do you know that? See? I might have said something along the lines of, well, okay, you say that's good. What if I don't want to sacrifice? What if, as a matter of fact, I want to have more pleasure and more fun than anybody else, and so I knock you over your head, rape your wife, and take everything you have? Who's to say that's not just as good? I wasn't thinking fast enough in those days. But really, I mean that's a great answer. I got to say, it did kind of satisfy me for a bit. It's a great answer. Well, okay, some of us are here to make everybody else's life a little bit more bearable. Okay, I guess that works. All right, I guess that works. But wow, we're all worm food. How do you stand up there and talk about, Christmas or Easter? How do you get up there and talk at a funeral or a wedding or a baptism? How do you function with those things when you believe there's no immortal soul? I don't know how these guys do it. I really don't. I just, it's mind-boggling to me. Questions, comments? We will move on next time to Excursus 2, which is a long and short, really, because it won't take really long to get through it. 4 or 5 pages on the history of Lutheranism in America, as opposed to the rest of the world. And it has some interesting side stories. But in any case, that should be probably our last session on Lutheranism, unless we get a lot of questions or whatever. And so then after that, we have the opportunity to move on to the Anglican Church and the Episcopal Church and others, or we can do something different. So I will ask the group when there's more of them here. Let's close. May the grace of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, the love of God the Father, and the fellowship of the Holy Spirit be and abide with us all. Amen.